I am Naomi, 35 years old and a director of financial compliance. I had just dropped my in-laws at the airport for an all-expenses-paid anniversary trip to the Bahamas. I paid for the first-class tickets and the luxury resort with my annual bonus. I was driving back to my office in downtown Atlanta when my phone rang. It was Mr. Winston, our loyal gardener of 7 years. His voice was shaking. "Do not go home, Miss Naomi," he warned. "Pull up your security cameras right now." I pulled over to the side of the road and opened the live feed on my phone. My heart stopped. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who tried to destroy you. Growing up, my parents taught me the value of hard work and building a solid financial foundation. I applied those lessons to everything I did, eventually becoming a top compliance auditor for a major corporate firm. I bought my beautiful home, a sprawling $1.5 million estate, in a quiet, affluent Atlanta suburb, entirely on my own before I even met Kendrick. Because I understand the dark side of finance, I put the property in a blind, limited liability company to protect my assets. Kendrick was a bank manager. He was handsome, charismatic, and came from a prominent family in our community. His father, Deacon Wallace, was a powerful figure at the largest church in our district. His mother, Vivian, was the ultimate church matriarch. On the surface, we were the perfect power couple. But behind closed doors, Kendrick and his family expected me to shrink myself to inflate their egos. Vivian constantly reminded me that a good woman always sacrifices her own comfort for her husband and his family. I tolerated their entitlement for 6 years because I loved Kendrick and believed in family loyalty. Sitting in my car on the shoulder of the highway, I stared at my phone screen in absolute disbelief. The high-definition security footage showed that Deacon Wallace and Vivian had not boarded their flight to the Bahamas. Instead, a black transport vehicle had dropped them right back at my front gate. The heavy oak front door swung open. Kendrick stood there welcoming his parents inside with a wide smile, but they were not alone. Kendrick's younger sister Jada and her unemployed husband Terrence were pulling up the driveway in a rented moving truck. I watched the live feed as Kendrick and Terrence walked out of my front door carrying enormous black trash bags. They marched across my manicured lawn and callously hurled the heavy bags onto the grass. One of the plastic bags ripped open upon impact. I watched my custom-tailored suits, my expensive shoes, and my late grandmother's irreplaceable heirloom quilt spill out into the dirt. They were throwing my entire life onto the lawn like garbage. Meanwhile, Jada was standing on my front porch pointing her finger and directing movers to carry her cheap furniture straight into my master bedroom. Panic and confusion washed over me for a fleeting second. Why was this happening? Kendrick and I had argued recently about Jada constantly asking for money, but nothing that warranted this level of disrespect. Then my compliance auditor brain took over. The tears that had threatened to fall immediately dried up. This was not a random act of anger. This was a highly coordinated ambush. They had waited until I was supposed to be trapped at the office all day. They had faked the airport trip to get me out of the house early. They intended to change the locks and force me out into the streets with nothing but the clothes on my back. They completely underestimated who they were dealing with. I slammed my car into gear and made a sharp U-turn across the median. I was not going to book a hotel room and cry. I was not going to call my friends and play the victim. I was going home to face the firing squad. The drive back to the suburbs took exactly 22 minutes. My mind raced, piecing together the timeline. Kendrick knew I had an important board meeting today. He knew I would be distracted, but he forgot that I had installed an independent encrypted security system that only I controlled. He thought I was just a blind, obedient wife who would eventually back down to avoid public embarrassment. That was his fatal mistake. I pulled my car onto the street and parked a few houses down, entirely out of sight. I wanted to walk up and catch them in the act. As I marched down the sidewalk, my heels clicking sharply against the concrete, the sheer audacity of the scene became clear. Jada was standing by the moving truck, sipping a smoothie and laughing with Vivian. Terrence was hauling my expensive vanity mirror out the front door. Deacon Wallace was standing on the porch, looking over his new domain like a conquering king. I pushed open the wrought iron gate. The heavy metal clanged shut behind me, echoing across the yard. Everyone froze. The laughter died instantly. Jada nearly dropped her drink. Vivian clutched her pearl necklace, her eyes wide with shock. Terrence stopped in his tracks, nearly dropping my mirror. Kendrick stepped out of the front door, his confident smile instantly vanishing when he saw me standing there. "Naomi," he stammered, stepping down from the porch. "You are supposed to be at the office. What are you doing here?" I ignored his question and looked at the pile of my belongings scattered across the grass. I looked at Vivian, who was quickly recovering her composure and putting on her righteous matriarch face. "What exactly is going on here?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously calm. I did not scream. I did not throw a tantrum. My absolute stillness seemed to unnerve them more than rage ever could. Vivian stepped forward, placing a hand on Kendrick's shoulder. She raised her chin, using that same condescending tone she used on the junior choir members at church. "Now, Naomi, do not cause a scene and embarrass yourself. We are doing what is best for this family. Jada is pregnant. She and Terrence need the master suite to prepare for the new baby. You have been married to my son for 6 years, and your womb is still empty. You two do not need all this space. Kendrick is the head of this household, and a good woman sacrifices for the village." I stared at her, absorbing the sheer toxicity of her words. She was using my fertility struggles, a deeply painful personal issue, as a weapon to steal my home. Kendrick nodded along with his mother, trying to puff out his chest to look intimidating. "My mother is right, Naomi. I am the man of the house. I made an executive decision today. Jada needs a stable environment for my future niece or nephew. You and I are going to pack up and move into Terrence's old 2-bedroom apartment across town. It is already settled. Take one for the team." Jada waddled over, rubbing her slightly rounded stomach. She had the nerve to be wearing one of my silk robes that she had clearly taken from my closet. "Honestly, Naomi, you should be happy to help your sister-in-law. It is not my fault you cannot give Kendrick a child. The Lord blesses those who are worthy. You have plenty of money from your little corporate job. You can buy yourself a nice little condo somewhere else. This house belongs to the family now." I looked at the 5 of them standing together on my property. They were a pack of narcissists feeding off each other's entitlement. They truly believed that because Kendrick was my husband, my wealth automatically belonged to his family. They thought I would bow my head, accept their disrespect, and quietly leave to protect Kendrick's reputation in the community. They thought the shame of a public marital dispute would keep me silent. I looked down at my grandmother's quilt soiled with dirt from the lawn. Then I looked back at Kendrick. I did not argue. I did not try to reason with them. I smiled. It was a slow, freezing smile that made Terrence take a step back and bump into the moving truck. "You are right, Kendrick," I said softly. "You are the man of the house. If you say Jada needs the master suite, then I suppose I should pack a bag." Kendrick looked incredibly relieved. He genuinely thought his masculine authority had worked. "See, Mom, I told you she would understand." He turned to me, his chest puffed out again. "Just grab what you need for the week, Naomi. I will bring the rest of your things to the apartment later. Do not make a fuss. The neighbors are already watching us." I walked past them, stepping over my scattered clothes, and went inside the house. I walked straight into my home office. They thought I was utterly defeated. They had no idea I was a compliance auditor who dealt with hostile corporate takeovers and financial fraud for a living. I grabbed a duffel bag and packed a few essentials. But more importantly, I went to the hidden safe behind my bookshelf. I took out my encrypted local server, which contained every single financial record, property deed, and banking credential I owned. I unplugged it, slipped it safely into my bag, and grabbed my passport. I walked back out the front door. The family was already celebrating their victory. Vivian was telling Jada where to place her living room furniture. Deacon Wallace was inspecting my expensive landscaping. Kendrick stood by the door looking smug and victorious. I walked down the driveway without looking back once. "Hey, Naomi." Kendrick called out, his voice dripping with absolute arrogance. "Do not even think about being petty and canceling the credit cards. I need to buy Jada some new nursery furniture this afternoon. Be a good wife and let it go." I reached my car and opened the door. I looked back at the man I had loved and the family I had tried so hard to please for the last 6 years. I pulled out my phone and opened my secure banking application. "I am not just canceling the cards, Kendrick," I whispered to myself as I started the engine and locked the doors. "I am freezing the entire grid. You want to be the man of the house? Good luck doing it without a single dime of my money." I pulled away from the curb, leaving them to their celebration, completely unaware that they had just declared war on the wrong woman. I ignored Kendrick's panicked question and slowly shifted my gaze to the pile of my personal belongings scattered across the grass. I looked at Vivian, who was quickly recovering her composure and arranging her features into her righteous, authoritative church matriarch expression. "What exactly is going on here?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously low and steady. I did not scream. I did not throw a tantrum. My absolute stillness seemed to unnerve them far more than rage ever could. I watched the gears turning in their heads as they realized their ambush had been compromised. Vivian stepped forward, placing a protective hand on Kendrick's shoulder as if I were the threat. She raised her chin, utilizing that same condescending, preachy tone she regularly used to scold the junior choir members at Sunday service. "Now, Naomi, do not cause a scene and embarrass yourself in front of the neighbors. We are simply doing what is best for the future of this family. Jada is pregnant. She and Terrence desperately need the master suite to prepare for the new baby. You have been married to my son for 6 entire years, and your womb is still completely empty. You two do not need all this space just for yourselves. Kendrick is the head of this household, and a good black wife knows how to sacrifice her own desires for the sake of the village." I stared at her, absorbing the sheer, unfiltered toxicity of her words. She was intentionally weaponizing my fertility struggles, a deeply painful and personal issue that had caused me endless nights of grief, using it as a blunt instrument to steal my home. Kendrick nodded along with his mother, trying to puff out his chest and lower his voice to look intimidating. "My mother is right, Naomi," he said, trying to sound authoritative. "I am the man of the house. I made an executive decision today. Jada needs a stable, luxurious environment for my future niece or nephew. Terrence is between jobs right now, and they need our support. You and I are going to pack up our essentials and move into Terrence's old 2-bedroom apartment across town until they get back on their feet. It is already settled. You just need to take one for the team and support my family." Jada waddled over dramatically, rubbing her slightly rounded stomach to emphasize her point. She had the absolute nerve to be wearing one of my expensive silk robes that she had clearly rummaged from my master closet. "Honestly, Naomi, you should be happy to help your sister-in-law out." Jada sneered, a wicked smirk playing on her lips. "It is not my fault you cannot give my brother a child. The Lord blesses those who are worthy of his grace. You make plenty of money from your little corporate compliance job. You can easily buy yourself a nice little condo somewhere else in the city. This house belongs to the family now, and we are putting it to good use." Terrence chuckled from the porch, leaning against my damaged mirror. "Yeah, Naomi. Do not be selfish. Share the wealth." I looked at the 5 of them standing together on my property. They were a unified pack of narcissists, feeding off each other's entitlement and using twisted religious justifications to excuse their theft. They truly believed that because Kendrick was my legal husband, my hard-earned wealth and my assets automatically belonged to his entire extended family. They thought I would bow my head, accept their blatant disrespect, and quietly leave just to protect Kendrick's reputation in our social circles. They assumed the crushing shame of a public marital dispute would keep me silent and compliant. I looked down at my grandmother's handmade quilt, currently absorbing mud from the lawn. Then I looked back at Kendrick's arrogant face. I did not argue with their twisted logic. I did not try to reason with people who felt entitled to my destruction. Instead, I smiled. It was a slow, freezing, calculated smile that made Terrence stop laughing immediately and take a nervous step back until he bumped into the moving truck. "You are absolutely right, Kendrick," I said softly, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "You are the man of the house. If you say Jada needs the master suite for her growing family, then I suppose I should go upstairs and pack a bag right now." Kendrick's posture relaxed instantly. He looked incredibly relieved, letting out a breath he had been holding. He genuinely thought his masculine authority and his mother's religious guilt trip had successfully broken my spirit. "See, Mom," he said, turning to Vivian with a triumphant grin. "I told you she would understand once I explained it to her. She just needed a little guidance." He turned back to me, his chest puffed out again, fully, leaning into his role as the benevolent dictator. "Just grab what you need for the week, Naomi. Leave the heavy lifting to us. I will bring the rest of your things to the apartment later this evening. Do not make a fuss while you are inside. The neighbors across the street are already watching us." I walked past them carefully, stepping over my scattered clothes, and walked through the front door. I went straight to my home office on the ground floor and locked the heavy oak door behind me. They thought I was utterly defeated, retreating to cry in private. They had absolutely no idea that they had just crossed a woman who dismantled hostile corporate takeovers and tracked millions of dollars in financial fraud for a living. I grabbed a sleek leather duffel bag from the closet and packed a few essential changes of clothes. But more importantly, I walked over to the hidden fireproof safe concealed behind my built-in bookshelf. I spun the combination dial, opened the heavy steel door, and carefully extracted my encrypted local server. This small black box contained every single financial record, property, deed, tax document, and banking credential I owned. It was the digital fortress that protected my entire life. I unplugged the power source, slipped the server safely into a padded compartment in my duffel bag, and grabbed my passport and primary identification documents. I zipped the bag shut, my mind already 10 steps ahead of their pathetic little scheme. I unlocked the office door and walked back out to the front yard. The family was already loudly celebrating their easy victory. Vivian was pointing at the exterior windows, loudly telling Jada where to place her living room furniture to get the best afternoon light. Deacon Wallace was inspecting my expensive landscaping, muttering about hiring someone cheaper to maintain the rose bushes. Kendrick stood by the open front door, looking incredibly smug and victorious. I walked straight down the driveway, my eyes fixed firmly on my car, without looking back at them even once. "Hey, Naomi," Kendrick called out as I reached the edge of the property. His voice was dripping with absolute arrogance and unearned power. "Do not even think about being petty and canceling the joint credit cards today. I need to buy Jada some brand new nursery furniture this afternoon, and we need to order a catered lunch for everyone helping with the move. Be a good, supportive wife and let it go. We will talk tonight at the apartment." I reached my car and opened the driver's side door. I finally looked back at the man I had loved and supported, and the family I had tried so desperately hard to please for the last 6 years. They looked so happy, completely convinced they had conquered me. I pulled out my phone and opened my secure multi-factor authentication banking application. "I am not just canceling the credit cards, Kendrick," I whispered quietly to myself as I started the engine and locked the doors. "I am freezing the entire financial grid. You want to play the big, powerful man of the house. Good luck doing it without access to a single dime of my money." I pulled away from the curb, leaving them to their arrogant celebration on my front lawn. As I merged back onto the main road heading toward downtown Atlanta, a fierce, burning resolve settled over me. They were completely unaware that they had just declared war on the wrong woman, and I was about to bring their entire house of cards crashing down. I drove straight into the heart of Buckhead, navigating the busy Atlanta traffic with a cold, terrifying calm. I completely bypassed the standard business hotels and pulled my personal car up to the busy valet stand of a luxury high-rise hotel. I handed the attendant my keys, grabbed my heavy leather duffel bag, and walked into the grand lobby. I requested their premier corner suite for an indefinite stay, handing over a platinum corporate card that Kendrick did not even know existed. Once inside the suite, I locked the heavy wooden door, bolted the security latch, and immediately went to work. I transformed the polished mahogany dining table into a financial command center. I unpacked my laptops, connected my portable monitors, and booted up the heavily encrypted local server I had rescued from my home office. The first thing I needed to do was assess the immediate damage. I logged into our joint banking portal, the account we use for daily household expenses, grocery shopping, and shared utility bills. The screen loaded, and a bitter laugh escaped my lips. The balance was zero. Kendrick had aggressively drained the entire $20,000 balance less than an hour ago. He had transferred every single cent into a private account in his own name. In his arrogant patriarchal mind, he truly believed he had just crippled me financially. He thought that by taking the joint funds, he was leaving me destitute and desperate, forcing me to eventually crawl back to the house and accept his ridiculous terms. He assumed that because we were married, all my hard-earned money was inherently his to control and distribute to his demanding family. That arrogant assumption was going to completely destroy him. Kendrick had spent the last 6 years enjoying the lavish lifestyle I provided, attending high-society galas and driving expensive cars, but he never actually understood how my wealth was structured. I am a director of financial compliance. I protect billion-dollar corporate portfolios from hostile takeovers, internal embezzlement, and malicious fraud. I would never leave my own personal assets exposed to a man whose greatest career achievement was managing a local retail bank branch. Kendrick did not know that the $1.5 million estate he was currently celebrating in did not actually belong to him. His name was not on the property deed. My name was not even directly on the deed. Before we ever got married, I took the substantial inheritance my grandmother left me and used it to purchase the property in cash. I then placed the entire estate under the strict ownership of a blind limited liability company. I was the sole managing member of that corporate entity. Legally speaking, Kendrick was nothing more than a month-to-month tenant living in a house owned by a business. I opened my primary financial dashboard and began systematically dismantling his access to my actual wealth. I permanently canceled all the premium credit cards where he was listed as an authorized user. I revoked his access to the backup investment portfolios. I changed the routing numbers for my corporate salary deposits. I removed his name from the emergency access lists on my brokerage accounts. I even locked him out of the airline miles accounts he loved to use for his golf trips. Within 15 minutes, I had completely severed his financial lifeline. The $20,000 he stole from the joint account was a remarkably cheap price to pay for absolute clarity. Let him buy Jada her nursery furniture with that stolen cash. It would be the very last purchase he ever made using my money. But my professional instincts were screaming at me. Kendrick was incredibly arrogant, but he was also deeply obsessed with his pristine reputation in the Atlanta business community and his highly respected standing in Deacon Wallace's massive church. For him to boldly kick me out of my own home in broad daylight meant he felt completely secure in his ownership of the property. He acted as if he held all the power. Why was he so confidently directing movers and claiming the house belonged to his family? I decided to run a full comprehensive audit on my own assets, starting with the county property records. I bypassed the standard public search portals and used my professional credentials to access the deeply buried municipal title databases. I pulled up the filings for the suburban estate. I stared at the high-resolution document on my screen, my breath catching sharply in my throat. There was a massive glaring red flag attached to the property title. A $400,000 home equity line of credit had been approved and fully dispersed against the house just 3 weeks ago. I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes scanning the digital paperwork in absolute horror. The loan originated directly from the exact same bank branch where Kendrick served as the managing director. I pulled up the signature pages. There, at the bottom of the authorization forms, was my name signed as the managing member of the limited liability company. but it was not my handwriting. The loops were entirely wrong, the slant was way too sharp, and the pen pressure was completely inconsistent. Kendrick had forged my signature. The sheer audacity of the crime left me temporarily stunned. He had completely bypassed the bank's standard identity verification safeguards because he was the boss. He had used his executive authority to push the fraudulent paperwork through his own subordinate loan officers, leveraging his spotless community reputation to avoid any suspicion or secondary audits. He had committed severe bank fraud and aggravated identity theft. He had put a $400,000 lien on my property without my knowledge, assuming I would never audit my own home records. This was a massive federal offense. If convicted, he would lose his banking license, his pristine reputation, and spend a significant portion of his life in a federal penitentiary. He had risked absolutely everything, but the puzzle was not entirely complete. I needed to know exactly where the stolen money went. If Kendrick wanted to steal $400,000, he would not be foolish enough to drop a massive lump sum of illicit cash directly into his personal checking account. That would immediately trigger a suspicious activity report with the federal financial regulators, leading to an immediate audit of his personal finances. I opened my forensic tracking software and began tracing the wire transfer associated with the loan disbursement. The bank records showed the money was routed through two intermediate holding accounts before finally landing in a commercial business account at a completely different banking institution across the city. I ran the routing numbers and the tax identification information for the final destination account. The money had been deposited into a corporate entity named Apex Horizon Investments. It sounded like a legitimate high-end financial management firm. I accessed the state business registry to pull the official incorporation documents for Apex Horizon Investments. I needed to see exactly who the registered agent and primary shareholder was. When the registration document loaded on my screen, I had to read the name 3 times to ensure my eyes were not deceiving me. The shell company was registered to Terrence. Jada's flashy, chronically unemployed husband was the sole proprietor of the holding company that had just received $400,000 of stolen equity from my home. Terrence had never held a legitimate job for more than 6 months. He spent his days bragging on social media about fake cryptocurrency investments while constantly borrowing money from Kendrick to pay his luxury car note. None of this made any logical sense. Kendrick absolutely despised Terrence. He constantly belittled Terrence behind closed doors for being a lazy, opportunistic parasite who lived entirely off his sister. Why in the world would a status-obsessed, meticulous bank manager like Kendrick risk a lengthy federal prison sentence just to hand nearly $500,000 of stolen money over to his deadbeat brother-in-law? There was a massive piece of the puzzle missing, and I was going to tear their entire family apart to find it. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the monitors illuminating the dark hotel suite. They thought they had simply kicked out a submissive wife. They did not realize they had just handed a forensic investigator the exact roadmap needed to ensure they all went to federal prison. The war had just begun. Tomorrow I would start digging into the hidden financial accounts of the church immediately. I knew exactly where to look next. The answers were buried inside Deacon Wallace and his precious congregation. He spent decades preaching about morality, honesty, and family values from the pulpit every single Sunday morning. But behind the stained glass windows and expensive tailored suits, they were all just common thieves playing a dangerous game. They picked the wrong target. I would win. I woke up at 5 in the morning feeling more energized than I had in years. I sent a brief professional email to my corporate partners, requesting a full week of personal time off. I had enough accrued vacation hours to cover a month, and nobody in my compliance department was going to question my absence. I ordered a large pot of black coffee from the hotel room service, tied my silk robe tightly around my waist, and sat back down at my makeshift command center. Terrence was the absolute weak link in their criminal chain. He was flashy, incredibly loud, and chronically careless with his digital footprint. If he was running a financial scam, he would definitely leave a massive trail of evidence. I started by pulling the incorporation documents for Apex Horizon Investments. I traced the company's social media presence and marketing materials. Terrence had aggressively branded himself as a self-taught cryptocurrency guru. He posted dozens of videos of himself standing in front of rented luxury sports cars wearing cheap designer knockoffs, promising guaranteed 20% monthly returns on all investments. But his target demographic was not young tech-savvy investors looking to make a quick profit. I cross-referenced the names of his registered client list with the online directory of Deacon Wallace's massive church. My blood ran completely cold as the horrific reality of his business model became clear. Terrence was specifically targeting the elderly members of the congregation. He was preying on the widows, the retired school teachers, and the grandmothers who trusted him implicitly, simply because he was legally married to the deacon's daughter. It was a classic textbook Ponzi scheme. He was actively using the retirement funds from new, unsuspecting investors to pay fake dividends to the older ones, skimming the vast majority of the cash to fund his lavish lifestyle and keep Jada dressed in designer clothes. But Terrence was far too incompetent to secure a lump sum of $400,000 entirely on his own. He needed a massive whale. He needed a silent partner with direct, unquestioned access to a massive pool of unregulated cash. I immediately shifted my forensic focus to Deacon Wallace. As the vice chair of the church's powerful financial committee, Wallace had unilateral, unchecked access to the congregation's various charity funds. Using my professional compliance tools, I pulled the church's publicly available tax filings and cross-referenced them with municipal construction permits. The church had been aggressively raising money for a brand new community youth center for the past 3 years. The devoted congregation had donated sacrificially every single Sunday, ultimately raising nearly $500,000. But there were absolutely no construction permits filed with the city of Atlanta. No local contractors had been hired. The commercial land they purchased sat completely empty, overgrown with weeds. I traced the wire routing numbers hidden deep within the church's digital ledgers. 3 months ago, Wallace had authorized a direct, untraceable transfer of $400,000 from the Youth Center Building Fund directly into Terrence's commercial holding account. Deacon Wallace genuinely thought Terrence was actually a financial genius. He had recklessly gambled the church's sacred charity money on his son-in-law's fake cryptocurrency scheme, hoping to rapidly double the youth center fund and quietly skim the massive profits for his own personal use. But the volatile cryptocurrency market crashed, and Terrence's unstable Ponzi scheme totally collapsed under its own weight. The stolen money evaporated practically overnight. The entire youth center fund was completely gone, squandered on Jada's luxury handbags and Terrence's leased sports cars. I dug further into the church's recent announcements. I found a digital bulletin posted on the church's private community board. The senior pastor had unexpectedly announced that a strict, uncompromising external audit of all church finances would take place on the 1st of next month. The panic inside the Wallace family must have been absolute and suffocating. Deacon Wallace was staring directly down the barrel of a massive embezzlement scandal that would completely ruin his pristine reputation, strip him of his religious authority, and land him in a federal penitentiary. He desperately needed to replace the $400,000 immediately, long before the ruthless corporate auditors arrived at the church doors. He could not simply go to a traditional commercial lender because he did not have the necessary collateral or the income to justify such a massive personal loan. So he turned to his golden child for salvation, Kendrick, desperate to save his father from prison and protect the sacred family name from public disgrace, looked at my $1.5 million estate and saw a giant, unguarded piggy bank. He recklessly forged my signature on the home equity line of credit, blindly approved the fraudulent loan through his own retail bank branch, and quickly wired the stolen money directly to Terrence's shell company. Terrence was supposed to quietly route the money back to the church's youth center fund, making it look like a highly successful return on a legitimate investment just in time for the external audit. It was a desperate, sloppy cover-up executed by arrogant men who believed they were completely untouchable. But why did they need to violently kick me out of my own home in the middle of the day? The answer hit me like a physical blow. Moving Jada and Terrence into my sprawling luxury estate was the final twisted piece of their desperate public relations strategy. By forcibly evicting me and moving them into a massive suburban mansion, Kendrick and Vivian were establishing a highly visible fake narrative of extreme wealth. When the observant church congregation saw Terrence living in a $1 million estate, they would automatically believe his investment firm was incredibly successful and highly lucrative. It would instantly legitimize his fraudulent scam, calm any nervous elderly investors demanding their money back, and solidify the family's untouchable, blessed status in the religious community. They were literally using my beautiful home as a theatrical movie set to cover up a massive federal crime. They were sacrificing my peace, my marriage, and my financial security to protect a family of common thieves. The sheer, unadulterated evil of their master plan left me sitting in stunned silence. Vivian had always preached about the sanctity of marriage and the heavy burden of the strong black woman, but she was nothing more than a ruthless accomplice. She was fully aware of the embezzlement. She knew her husband was stealing from the church, she knew her son was committing bank fraud, and she actively participated in discarding me like trash to facilitate their criminal enterprise. They truly believed I would just walk away quietly and lick my wounds in a small, cramped apartment while they paraded around my estate. I closed my laptop, a deep, resonant sense of vindication washing over me. I did not just have enough evidence for a bitter divorce. I had meticulously gathered enough concrete, irrefutable federal evidence to put every single one of them behind bars for a very long time. I was going to systematically dismantle their entire lives piece by piece until there was absolutely nothing left but ash and regret. My phone buzzed sharply on the mahogany dining table, breaking the heavy silence of the hotel suite. The screen illuminated, displaying a new text message. It was from First Lady Sarah, the senior pastor's wife. She was a kind, observant woman who had always treated me with genuine respect during Sunday services. I unlocked my phone and opened the message. The text was dripping with profound pity and deep, misplaced concern. Naomi, my heart is breaking for you right now, she wrote. Please know that we are all praying for your healing and your quick recovery. If you need a safe place to stay or someone to speak with during this dark time, the church doors are always open to you. We love you. I frowned, staring at the glowing screen in utter confusion. Healing. Quick recovery. What exactly was she talking about? I scrolled down to read the second part of her message. Vivian has been calling everyone in the congregation since yesterday afternoon, she continued. She told us all about your severe mental breakdown and how you suddenly abandoned Kendrick without any warning. Please seek professional psychiatric help, Naomi. Do not let the devil destroy your beautiful mind. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. A cold, furious rage ignited in the very center of my chest. They were not just stealing my home and my money. Vivian was actively weaponizing the church community against me. The vicious, calculated smear campaign had officially begun, and they were painting me as the crazy, unstable black woman. This pathetic strategy was designed entirely to discredit any future claims I might make about their fraudulent activities. If I tried to expose the embezzlement, the congregation would simply dismiss my valid accusations as the wild, paranoid delusions of a scorned, mentally ill wife. Vivian was systematically laying the groundwork to isolate me from any potential allies within our shared social circles. I typed a remarkably polite, thoroughly measured response to First Lady Sarah. Thank you so much for your prayers and your concern. I am perfectly safe, and I am currently seeking the exact professional counsel that I need right now. God bless you. I hit send, completely unfazed by their childish gossip. They wanted to play games with my reputation. Fine. I would play back, but I would use federal indictments instead of prayer circles. The investigation was over. The next morning, the Atlanta sun rose over the city skyline, casting a warm glow through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my hotel suite. I had spent the entire night mapping out the intricate web of financial crimes Deacon Wallace and Kendrick had committed. But as I drank my black coffee, I realized the financial fraud was only one piece of their grand illusion. I needed to understand the social narrative they were spinning to the congregation. It was Wednesday, which meant the church hosted its weekly midweek virtual prayer and fellowship meeting. I opened my laptop and created a brand new untraceable email address. I used it to register for the church online meeting portal under the name of a fictitious visiting sister from a neighboring parish. I turned my camera off, muted my microphone, and quietly slipped into the digital conference room just as the opening prayers concluded. The screen was dominated by the senior pastor, but sitting prominently in the center frame, dialed in from my very own living room, were Vivian Kendrick and Jada. The sheer audacity of seeing them lounging on my custom-imported sofa made my blood boil, but I kept my breathing steady and watched their performance. Vivian took the digital floor, wiping away non-existent tears with a lace handkerchief. She looked directly into the camera, broadcasting her fake sorrow to over 300 active church members. She asked the congregation for special urgent prayers for her son. She painted a tragic, heartbreaking picture of a devoted husband who had been cruelly abandoned by a mentally unstable wife. She told the entire congregation that the pressures of corporate life had completely fractured my mind, causing me to suffer a severe psychological break. According to Vivian, I had become erratic, dangerous, and entirely detached from reality before running away into the night. The congregation flooded the chat box with messages of sympathy and horror. People I had known for years, women I had served alongside in community outreach programs, were typing out prayers for my broken mind and offering Kendrick their unwavering support. But Vivian was not finished. She smoothly pivoted the narrative to her daughter. She pulled Jada into the frame. Jada was wearing a loose, flowing maternity dress, gently rubbing her stomach with a perfectly manicured hand. Vivian explained that the sheer trauma of my sudden violent departure had placed immense stress on Jada and her high-risk pregnancy. She claimed the doctor had placed Jada on strict bed rest to protect the unborn child. Vivian eloquently pleaded with the church community to surround the expecting mother with love, shielding her from the dark demonic energy I had allegedly left behind in the house. Then came the financial pitch. It was executed with flawless precision. The senior pastor, completely unaware of the massive embezzlement scheme happening under his nose, announced the creation of a special online donation portal. He called it the Village Baby Fund. He urged the congregation to donate cash directly to Jada and Terrence to help them prepare the nursery and cover the expensive specialized medical care required for her high-risk condition. I watched the donation ticker on the side of the screen skyrocket. $50 here, $100 there. Elderly church members on fixed incomes were sending their grocery money to support a woman who was currently sitting in a $1 million estate she had stolen. They were milking the congregation dry, using my fabricated insanity and Jada and her fragile pregnancy to extort thousands of dollars in a matter of minutes. I closed the laptop, disgusted but entirely unsurprised. Their greed had absolutely no limits. But something about Jada and her performance bothered me. The timeline of her pregnancy did not make any sense. Just a month ago, she was aggressively drinking expensive champagne at a family brunch and complaining bitterly about her fertility struggles. Now she was suddenly far enough along to require a dedicated nursery and a massive financial support fund. My instincts told me there was another layer of deception hiding just beneath the surface. I needed physical evidence from inside my house, and I knew exactly who could get it for me. I picked up my phone and dialed Mr. Winston. I asked him to meet me at a quiet, unassuming coffee shop located 2 towns over, far away from anyone who might recognize us. An hour later, I was sitting in a corner booth when the bell above the door chimed. Mr. Winston walked in wearing his familiar denim overalls and a worn baseball cap. He was carrying a heavy black canvas duffel bag. He slid into the booth across from me, and placed the bag carefully on the floor between his boots. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp and fiercely loyal. He had worked for me for 7 years, and I had always treated him with the respect and dignity my in-laws consistently denied him. When his daughter needed help navigating a predatory student loan situation 2 years ago, I had personally intervened and cleared her debt. He never forgot that. "I told you I would keep my eyes open." "Miss Naomi," he said, keeping his voice low, "they have been treating your beautiful home like a common dumping ground. That Terrence boy has been throwing his empty liquor bottles right into the rose bushes. But I noticed something else. Miss Jada told the trash collection crew to skip the house this week because they had too much overflow from moving in. They piled all the master bathroom trash into a separate bin by the garage. I knew you might want to see what they were throwing away before the trucks came next week. I waited until they were all busy eating lunch on the patio, bagged it up, and brought it straight to you." I thanked him, sliding a thick envelope of cash across the table to compensate him for his extreme risk and loyalty. He tried to refuse, but I insisted. I took the duffel bag back to my hotel suite, put on a pair of latex gloves, and spread a large plastic tarp across the bathroom floor. I unzipped the bag and began meticulously sorting through the discarded contents of my own master bathroom. There were empty takeout containers discarded, moving manifests and receipts for expensive nursery furniture purchased with the $20,000 Kendrick had stolen from our joint account. But as I dug deeper, I found exactly what I was looking for. Buried at the bottom of the bag was a clear plastic medical waste bag. Inside were dozens of discarded empty cardboard boxes from a prominent Atlanta fertility clinic. I carefully extracted the flattened boxes and laid them out on the counter. They were packaging for highly specific specialized hormone injection pens used exclusively during the final stages of in vitro fertilization. I found the corresponding pharmacy receipts crumpled inside a ripped envelope. The prescription was clearly printed with Jada and her name. I grabbed my laptop and began cross-referencing the specific medications, the dosage amounts, and the strict medical timelines associated with this particular fertility clinic protocols. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with devastating clarity. Jada had undergone a highly expensive IVF cycle, likely funded by the money Deacon Wallace had stolen from the church youth center. But the dates on the medication boxes and the final clinic discharge papers told a completely different story than the one Vivian was selling to the congregation. The final blood test results were crumpled in the pile. The numbers were absolute. The embryo transfer had failed. Jada had hormone levels that plummeted back to 0 over 3 weeks ago. The clinic had officially discharged her. Jada was not pregnant. She was not high risk. There was no baby. The entire pregnancy was a massive, calculated fabrication. She was wearing a fake belly to deceive the church and extort cash donations through the village baby fund. But the deception went even deeper than petty charity fraud. The fake pregnancy was the ultimate emotional weapon they had used to guilt Kendrick into violently evicting me. They used the promise of a new family heir to blind Kendrick to his own financial crimes, convincing him that forging the home equity loan and stealing my house was a necessary noble sacrifice for the future of their bloodline. They were using a non-existent child to justify destroying my life and robbing a church blind. I stripped off the latex gloves and washed my hands, staring at my reflection in the hotel bathroom mirror. The sheer magnitude of their collective sociopathy was breathtaking. Vivian, the righteous church mother, was actively orchestrating a fake pregnancy scam to steal from her own congregation. Deacon Wallace was embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars. Terrence was running a Ponzi scheme targeting the elderly. Kendrick was committing federal bank fraud and identity theft. And Jada was playing the fragile, expecting mother to secure a $1 million estate she never earned. They had built an entire empire of lies, and it was entirely supported by my stolen wealth and my forced silence. I walked back into the main living area of the suite and sat down at my computer. I meticulously scanned and archived every single medical receipt, medication box, and clinic discharge paper Mr. Winston had secured. I added the massive file of medical fraud evidence to the encrypted folder containing the forged banking documents and the church wire transfers. The guillotine was fully assembled, sharpened, and waiting to drop. I just needed the perfect moment to execute the strike. I needed maximum visibility, maximum humiliation, and a venue where they could not simply run away and hide behind closed doors. A sharp chime from my email inbox broke my concentration. I opened my primary personal email account. Sitting right at the top of my inbox was a message forwarded to me by one of my loyal neighbors who was deeply confused by the situation. It was an opulent, professionally designed digital invitation. The graphics featured elegant gold scrolling script over a background of soft pastel baby colors. The bold text proudly announced a spectacular sip and see and housewarming gala. Vivian and Kendrick were officially co-hosting a massive, lavish outdoor celebration at my house this coming Saturday afternoon. The digital invitation proudly boasted that the event would feature premium catering, a live string quartet, and a special dedication ceremony for the new nursery. They were officially debuting their newly stolen wealth and Jada and her miraculous pregnancy to the world. I scrolled down to the bottom of the forwarded email and clicked on the public guest list. My heart leaped with dark, undeniable satisfaction. They had invited over 150 people. The confirmed attendees included the senior pastor of the church, the entire board of deacons, several prominent local politicians, and most importantly, the mayor of Atlanta, who also happened to sit on the executive board of the exact same retail bank where Kendrick served as branch manager. They had invited the absolute elite tier of Atlanta society to parade around my backyard and celebrate their successful theft. They wanted to cement their untouchable status in front of the most powerful people in the city. They thought they had won the war, and they wanted an audience to witness their glorious victory. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the golden letters on the digital invitation. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face for the first time since this nightmare began. They just built my stage. Thursday morning arrived with a crisp, cool breeze that swept through the bustling streets of downtown Atlanta. I did not bother ordering room service or checking my personal phone. I had a precise, uncompromising schedule to maintain. My enemies were busy selecting catered menus and floral arrangements for their grand society gala at my house. I was busy selecting the exact legal instruments that would completely destroy their freedom. I needed a team of absolute sharks professionals who operated with the same cold, calculating efficiency that I did. My first call was to Valerie, a ruthless, high-powered real estate attorney who happened to be my line sister from college. Valerie was famous in Atlanta for dismantling fraudulent property claims and executing hostile evictions with terrifying speed. My second call was to Special Agent Carter, a senior investigator at the Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I had collaborated with Carter 2 years ago on a massive corporate embezzlement case. He knew my work was flawless, and he trusted my forensic audits completely. I arranged a private, highly secure meeting at Valerie's sleek law firm in Midtown. I arrived 10 minutes early carrying the heavy leather duffel bag that contained my encrypted server and the thick files of physical evidence Mr. Winston had secured for me. Valerie greeted me in her corner office, her sharp eyes scanning my face with deep concern. Before she could ask any questions about my well-being, I placed the files on her glass conference table. I told her I did not need a shoulder to cry on. I needed a guillotine. Special Agent Carter arrived shortly after, wearing a dark, unassuming suit and carrying a secure federal laptop. I connected my portable monitors and projected my entire investigation onto the large screen at the end of the room. I walked them through the timeline with the absolute precision of a seasoned compliance director presenting to a corporate board. I started with the forged home equity line of credit. I showed Agent Carter the specific IP addresses utilized to log into the banking portal. I proved that Kendrick had actively used his executive banking credentials to bypass the mandatory identity verification safeguards. I displayed the fraudulent signature pages alongside the official legally binding documents for my limited liability company. I watched Agent Carter lean forward in his leather chair, his eyes narrowing as he processed the sheer magnitude of the crime. Kendrick had committed severe textbook bank fraud and aggravated identity theft. By using an interstate banking network to facilitate the transaction, he had automatically triggered federal jurisdiction. It was a massive, undeniable federal offense, carrying a mandatory minimum sentence. But I did not stop there. I pulled up the wire transfer logs and the routing numbers connecting Deacon Wallace and the church charity funds. I showed them exactly how Deacon Wallace had secretly funneled $400,000 of the Sacred Youth Center building fund directly into Terrence and his fake cryptocurrency holding company. I explained that Terrence was running a predatory Ponzi scheme that explicitly targeted the elderly members of the church congregation. I watched Valerie shake her head in absolute disgust. The level of deception was staggering. Deacon Wallace had stolen from his own parishioners, and Kendrick had illegally leveraged my private estate to cover up his father's massive embezzlement right before the external church auditors arrived. They had moved Jada and Terrence into my luxury home to create a powerful, deceptive illusion of extreme wealth, hoping to legitimize Terrence and his fake business to the wealthy congregation. Agent Carter typed furiously on his secure laptop, verifying the corporate registry numbers and the banking codes I provided. He looked up at me, his expression a mixture of profound professional respect and utter disbelief. He told me that federal prosecutors spend months, sometimes years, trying to build financial fraud cases of this magnitude. Criminals usually hide their tracks behind complex offshore accounts and layered shell companies. But Kendrick Terrence and Deacon Wallace were not criminal masterminds. They were arrogant, desperate amateurs who believed their prominent social standing in the Black community and their powerful positions in the church would somehow shield them from federal scrutiny. They had left a massive, glowing digital footprint that pointed directly back to their personal devices. I had essentially gift-wrapped an entire crime syndicate and handed it to the federal government on a silver platter. I turned to Valerie to address the immediate pressing issue of my physical property. Kendrick and his family were currently occupying my home, claiming tenant rights based on his status as my legal husband. Valerie smiled her signature terrifying courtroom smile. She explained that standard eviction protocols absolutely do not apply when a property is actively being used to facilitate a major federal crime. Because Kendrick had committed severe financial fraud to secure the property against the legal owner, and because Terrence and Jada had entered the premises under fraudulent criminal pretenses, their occupancy was legally classified as hostile criminal trespass. Valerie pulled out her embossed legal stationery and began drafting an immediate, indisputable 24-hour notice of eviction. It was not a polite request to vacate the premises. It was a hostile, aggressive removal order that completely nullified any fabricated tenant rights Kendrick thought he possessed. We spent the next 4 hours finalizing the paperwork and securing the digital evidence chain of custody. Valerie ensured that the eviction notice cited specific state statutes regarding property fraud, making it impossible for Kendrick to appeal the decision or request a temporary stay of execution from a local judge. The moment the federal agents moved in, the eviction would be simultaneously enforced. I was going to physically hand Vivian and Jada their walking papers while their husbands were being handcuffed on the lawn. It was a beautiful, meticulously crafted legal trap, and there was absolutely no escape route for any of them. The arrogance they had displayed on my front porch just a few days ago was about to cost them their freedom, their reputations, and their entire future. As the afternoon sun began to set over the Atlanta skyline, casting long shadows across the conference room, Agent Carter closed his laptop. He secured the external hard drive containing all my forensic evidence into a specialized evidence bag. He looked at me with a serious, unwavering gaze. He confirmed that they had more than enough concrete evidence to secure immediate federal indictments for extensive wire fraud, severe bank fraud, aggravated identity theft, and massive corporate embezzlement. The sheer volume of the stolen funds elevated the charges to the highest possible felony tiers. Deacon Wallace would face an additional enhancement for exploiting a registered religious charity. Terrence would face separate charges for defrauding elderly investors. The federal magistrate would gladly sign the search and arrest warrants first thing tomorrow morning. The entire Wallace family was officially going down. Agent Carter leaned across the glass table, his hands folded professionally. He asked me a very simple, direct question. He wanted to know exactly when and where I wanted the federal arrest warrants executed. He explained that they usually prefer to arrest white-collar suspects at their respective corporate offices early in the morning to prevent the destruction of digital evidence. But since I had already secured the primary servers and frozen the compromised accounts, the element of surprise was entirely up to my discretion. He offered to send a highly trained tactical team to the house on Friday evening, quietly arresting them before the weekend activities began. I thought about Vivian standing in my driveway, commanding me to take one for the team and sacrifice my happiness for her golden daughter. I thought about Kendrick puffing out his chest, using his masculine authority to kick me out of the home I had purchased with my own grandmother's money. I thought about Jada wearing my silk robe, rubbing her fake silicone belly, and demanding I share my wealth. I thought about the opulent digital invitations sitting in my email inbox, proudly announcing their grand housewarming gala to the elite members of Atlanta society. They wanted a massive audience. They wanted to actively show off their stolen prize to the senior pastor, the prominent local politicians, and the wealthy bank executives. They wanted to boldly cement their fraudulent legacy in front of the entire city, wearing expensive clothes purchased with funds stolen from innocent elderly church members. They sought public glory based entirely on a foundation of cruel lies and systematic theft. They craved the spotlight above all else. I looked directly into Agent Carter's eyes, my posture rigid, my voice completely steady and cold as ice. Saturday at exactly 3 in the afternoon, I replied. I will make sure all the suspects are in one place dressed to the nines. Saturday arrived with a bright, cloudless sky that perfectly illuminated the absolute sheer audacity taking place on my property. I parked my personal vehicle 2 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance, taking my time to mentally prepare for the confrontation. As I approached the wrought iron gates of my estate, the unmistakable, elegant sound of a live string quartet drifted through the warm afternoon air. Kendrick and Vivian had spared absolutely no expense in spending other people's stolen money. They had aggressively transformed my sprawling backyard into an opulent high society wonderland. Massive white canvas tents were erected across the manicured lawn to provide shade. Crystal chandeliers hung from the temporary ceilings, catching the bright sunlight and casting beautiful prismatic reflections across the pristine landscaping. Uniformed caterers carried heavy silver trays loaded with expensive beluga caviar, premium, imported champagne, and fresh seafood. It was a grotesque, overwhelming display of unearned luxury and blatant financial fraud. They were actively celebrating their criminal enterprise while simultaneously posing as upstanding, righteous pillars of the local Atlanta community. Over 150 elite guests were happily mingling on my stone patio. I could clearly see prominent local politicians, wealthy bank executives, and the entire executive board of deacons from the church. They were all dressed in their absolute finest pastel summer suits and elegant floral dresses, laughing and toasting to a completely fabricated pregnancy and a stolen house. I easily spotted the mayor of Atlanta standing near the custom-built outdoor bar, shaking hands with Terrence. Terrence was wearing a ridiculously expensive tailored designer suit that he undoubtedly purchased with the exact funds he skimmed from the vulnerable elderly church members. He was playing the role of the highly successful cryptocurrency investor to absolute perfection, puffing out his chest and graciously accepting congratulations from the very people he and his father-in-law had just ruthlessly defrauded. Jada was comfortably seated on a plush velvet throne chair that had been intentionally placed directly in the center of the patio for maximum visibility. She was wearing a flowing, expensive designer maternity gown, gently resting her manicured hands on her fake silicone belly. Vivian hovered right beside her, acting as the proud protective grandmother, happily accepting lavish luxury gifts and thick white envelopes stuffed with cash from the unsuspecting generous congregation members. Kendrick was working the crowd like a seasoned career politician, holding a crystal glass of expensive scotch and accepting praise for his beautiful home and his growing family. They had successfully constructed a perfect shimmering illusion of ultimate success. It was finally time for me to shatter it completely into a million tiny pieces. I confidently pushed open the front gates and began my long, deliberate walk up the winding paved driveway. I had chosen my specific wardrobe for this exact moment, with absolute, uncompromising precision. I was not wearing the subdued, messy, conservative colors of a broken, mentally unstable woman. I was wearing a stunning, meticulously tailored crimson-red power suit that commanded immediate, undeniable attention from everyone in the vicinity. Paired with razor-sharp stiletto heels, elegant gold jewelry, and flawless makeup, I looked like absolute royalty. I looked exactly like a powerful woman who unequivocally owned the ground she was currently walking on, because I legally did. As I rounded the corner of the brick house and stepped into the full view of the massive backyard patio, the festive atmosphere shifted instantly. One of the catering staff dropped a silver serving pair of tongs in shock. The sharp metallic clatter caused a few wealthy guests near the entrance to turn around. When they saw me, their jaws literally dropped open. The whispers began immediately, rapidly spreading through the massive crowd like a fast-moving wildfire. Vivian had spent the last several days calling every single person in that backyard, intentionally painting a tragic, pitiful picture of a desperate woman who had completely lost her mind. She had thoroughly convinced them all that I was suffering from a severe psychological break, that I was wandering the city streets, looking disheveled, erratic, and dangerously detached from all objective reality. The elite guests fully expected to see a broken, hysterical, sobbing victim. Instead, they were looking at a fierce, untouchable corporate auditor radiating pure, unapologetic dominance and absolute authority. The whispering grew significantly louder, a massive wave of confusion and shock washing over the elite attendees. The lead cellist in the string quartet noticed the sudden dramatic shift in the crowd and accidentally missed a note. The violinist followed his gaze, saw me standing there radiating power, and slowly lowered her bow. Within seconds, the classical music screeched to a complete and highly awkward halt. The sudden deafening silence was incredibly powerful and heavy. Every single eye in the entire backyard was locked directly on me. I kept my posture completely rigid and my facial expression entirely unreadable as I took another deliberate step forward into my own backyard. Kendrick finally noticed the heavy silence. He turned around, the glass of expensive scotch frozen halfway to his mouth. The smug, incredibly confident smile on his handsome face evaporated instantly, replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. He nearly dropped his crystal drink onto the stone patio. His eyes darted frantically toward the mayor, then toward his scheming mother, and finally back to me. He realized immediately that his entire fragile house of cards was currently caught in a massive, unavoidable hurricane. He quickly placed his glass on a passing caterer's silver tray and rushed across the patio directly toward me, his movements jerky and visibly panicked. He desperately tried to plaster a fake reassuring smile on his face for the benefit of his wealthy banking colleagues actively watching us, but the heavy sweat beading on his forehead betrayed his absolute internal dread. He reached me and aggressively grabbed my upper arm, his fingers digging harshly into my crimson blazer. "Naomi? What in the world are you doing here?" he whispered furiously through his tightly gritted teeth. "You need to turn around and leave right now. You are going to ruin everything. Go back to the apartment before you completely embarrass yourself in front of my boss." I looked down at his hand aggressively gripping my arm, then looked directly into his terrified, desperate eyes. I did not flinch. I did not pull away immediately. I just stared at him with absolute zero emotion, letting him feel the full crushing weight of his impending destruction. "You do not give me orders on my own property, Kendrick," I replied, my voice remarkably low and steady enough to cut through the quiet air. "You are just a tenant, and your lease is officially up today." Before he could fully process the meaning of my words, Vivian came marching through the thick crowd of guests. She had quickly linked arms with the senior pastor, aggressively dragging the poor man along to act as her holy shield. She was desperately trying to maintain her fabricated, calculated narrative of the concerned, deeply religious mother-in-law dealing with a highly tragic situation. She stopped a few feet away from me, her face expertly arranged in a mask of exaggerated performative pity. She let out a loud, highly theatrical gasp designed to perfectly capture the attention of everyone standing nearby. She placed her hand over her heart. "Oh, you poor sick child!" Vivian cried out, pressing a dramatic hand to her chest. "Why are you not resting at the psychiatric clinic? We have been praying for your broken mind all week. Please, Naomi, you are deeply confused and acting out of your sickness. Let Kendrick gently guide you to your car. We need to get you to a hospital right now before you accidentally hurt yourself or the precious baby." The senior pastor nodded sympathetically, stepping forward with his hands raised in a calming pastoral gesture. "Sister Naomi, please listen to your loving family. They only want to help you find peace and healing. Please do not cause a disturbance today." I effortlessly shook off Kendrick's aggressive grip, stepping away from his reach. The crowd was completely silent, waiting for my reaction. I walked straight past Vivian, completely ignoring her pathetic, desperate performance. I stepped up to the small podium and the microphone that had been specifically set up for the afternoon toasts. I grasped the microphone stand and tapped the top of the microphone exactly twice. The sharp, amplified thumping sound echoed loudly across the entire backyard, demanding absolute attention from every single guest present. I looked directly down at Vivian, my eyes locking with hers. "I am not sick, Vivian," I said clearly, my voice booming through the high-quality speakers and completely shattering her carefully constructed lie. "But someone here is about to need a doctor." The crowd gasped. Kendrick stumbled backward, realizing that he had entirely lost control of the narrative. The ultimate reckoning had finally arrived, and I was ready. The sharp feedback of the microphone lingered in the warm afternoon air. I stood at the podium looking out over the sea of pastel suits and expensive floral dresses. 150 of Atlanta's most influential citizens stared back at me in absolute breathless silence. I reached into my tailored crimson blazer and smoothly extracted my sleek silver iPad. I did not look at Kendrick, who was currently frozen in terror near the catering tables. I did not look at Vivian, whose mouth was opening and closing like a suffocating fish. I focused entirely on the massive state-of-the-art outdoor LED screen that Terrence had foolishly rented to display photos of his fake opulent lifestyle. With 3 quick taps on my tablet, I wirelessly bypassed their basic Bluetooth connection and mirrored my screen directly onto the colossal display panel behind me. The massive screen flickered, dropping the slideshow of Jada's maternity photos, and replaced it with my stark, black and white compliance presentation. "Welcome to my home, ladies and gentlemen," I announced, my voice steady and commanding, ringing out over the premium sound system. "I know you are all invited here today to celebrate a housewarming and a beautiful new life. But since I am the sole legal owner of this $1.5 million estate, I decided to provide the afternoon entertainment myself." I turned my gaze directly to the center of the patio. Jada was sitting on her plush velvet throne chair, her hands instinctively clutching the sides of the armrests. Her smug, entitled expression was rapidly melting into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. Beside her, Terrence aggressively adjusted his expensive designer tie, trying to maintain his facade of a wealthy cryptocurrency mogul. He glared at me, attempting to project masculine intimidation, but his eyes betrayed the deep instinctual fear of a con artist who knows his mark has just caught him. I tapped my iPad screen to bring up the first slide. "Let us start by celebrating the guest of honor." I continued, my voice echoing across the pristine landscaping. "Jada, you have been parading around my backyard all afternoon, accepting lavish gifts and thick envelopes of cash from the generous, hardworking members of this congregation. I understand the church even set up a special village baby fund to help you with your highly publicized high-risk pregnancy. I looked past Jada to the front row of guests. Several senior church mothers women, who had undoubtedly written substantial checks from their fixed retirement incomes, nodded proudly in agreement. They still believed the beautiful lie. They still thought they were fulfilling their sacred Christian duty by supporting the deacon's pregnant daughter. I swiped my finger across the glass screen of my tablet. A massive high-resolution digital receipt materialized on the colossal LED display behind me. The collective gasp from the crowd was instantaneous and deafening. This is a verified purchase receipt from an exclusive online theatrical supply company, I explained, reading the details aloud for the guests seated near the back. It is for a custom-made medical-grade silicone prosthetic maternity belly. Retail price $1,200. Billed to a credit card belonging to Terrence and delivered directly to Jada just 4 days before she announced her miraculous pregnancy to the church. Jada physically recoiled, her hands flying up to cover her chest. The audience murmured in deep confusion, trying to process the bizarre image of the fake silicone stomach projected brightly in front of them. Terrence leaped forward, pointing an aggressive finger toward the stage. "That is a complete lie," he shouted, his voice cracking under the intense pressure. "She hacked our private accounts. She fabricated that receipt because she is jealous of my beautiful wife and our blessed child. Do not listen to this crazy woman." I did not even blink at his pathetic outburst. I simply swiped to the next slide. 2 new heavily redacted medical documents appeared side by side on the massive screen. The bold, undeniable logo of Atlanta's premier fertility clinic was stamped across the top of both pages. "I know medical records are a deeply private matter," I said, maintaining my cold, professional tone. "But when you actively use your medical status to extort thousands of dollars from innocent elderly church members, you forfeit your right to privacy." The document on the left is a verified clinic discharge summary. The document on the right contains official time-stamped laboratory blood test results. I pointed to the glowing screen behind me. As you can all clearly read, Jada underwent a highly expensive in vitro fertilization cycle last month. However, the final blood tests show her hormone levels plummeted back to zero exactly 3 weeks ago. The embryo transfer was completely unsuccessful. Jada is not pregnant. She has not been pregnant for nearly a month. There is absolutely no baby. You have all been viciously scammed. The revelation hit the affluent crowd like a physical shockwave. Total, absolute chaos erupted across the stone patio. Jada let out a strangled, humiliating sob. In a moment of pure, unconscious panic, she leaned forward and grabbed her stomach, inadvertently causing the soft, flowing fabric of her expensive designer maternity gown to pull tight against her midsection. The unnatural, perfectly rigid outline of the silicone prosthetic strap was instantly visible through the thin silk material to everyone standing nearby. A wealthy bank executive standing in the front row pointed directly at her waistline in sheer disgust. The church aunties, the very women who had fervently prayed for her and handed her their hard-earned cash just an hour ago, erupted into furious, righteous outrage. "You stole our money," one of the senior choir directors screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Jada. "You sat in the sacred sanctuary and lied to the Lord." Terrence was completely losing his mind. He lunged toward the crowd, desperately trying to block their view of his exposed, sobbing wife, loudly threatening to sue me for defamation. Kendrick was completely frozen near the catering tables, his jaw hanging open, watching the pristine, untouchable reputation of his family disintegrate into absolute dust in a matter of seconds. He was powerless to stop the devastating chain reaction I had just unleashed. The mayor of Atlanta, recognizing the severe, immediate legal implications of charity fraud, quickly signaled to his private security detail and began subtly backing away from the bar, desperate to distance himself from the toxic fallout. Vivian, however, chose the path of total, unhinged desperation. Realizing that her flawless social standing was evaporating before her eyes, she completely abandoned her sophisticated, aristocratic church mother persona. She let out a guttural, terrifying screech and charged toward the massive LED screen like a feral animal. She aggressively pushed past a caterer, knocking a tray of crystal champagne flutes onto the stone patio, where they shattered into hundreds of sparkling pieces. She reached the base of the colossal television screen and began violently ripping at the heavy, thick black power cables scattered across the grass. "Turn it off!" Vivian shrieked, her perfectly styled hair falling into her face as she frantically yanked on the thick rubber cords. "Turn it off right now. She is a demon. She is an agent of Satan sent to destroy this blessed family. Do not look at those lies. My daughter is blessed and highly favored. The devil is using her to blind you all." Her desperate physical struggle with the heavy outdoor electrical equipment was incredibly pathetic. The thick power cables were securely bolted into heavy-duty industrial generators. Vivian yanked and pulled her expensive manicured nails, chipping and tearing as she fought against the heavy machinery, screaming prayers of spiritual warfare into the warm afternoon air. The elite guests watched her frantic, undignified meltdown in profound, uncomfortable silence. The illusion of the perfect Holy Wallace family was completely, undeniably dead. I stood calmly at the podium, watching Vivian exhaust herself. I did not move to stop her. I simply let her completely humiliate herself in front of the entire congregation and the city elite. I leaned closely into the microphone, ensuring my voice remained the absolute focal point of the sprawling, chaotic backyard. My tone was cold, sharp, and totally devoid of any mercy. "You want to talk about blessings, Vivian?" I asked, my voice slicing effortlessly through her frantic, hysterical screams. The entire crowd immediately hushed, hanging on to my every word, eager for the next devastating revelation. "Let us talk about how this beautiful, extravagant party was funded today. Let us talk about the youth center." The heavy silence that followed my question felt thick enough to suffocate the entire patio. I did not give Vivian a chance to recover from her undignified assault on the power cables. I tapped the screen of my tablet, and the colossal LED display behind me shifted instantly. The fake medical records vanished, replaced by a complex, highly detailed spreadsheet. It was a flawless, undeniable forensic mapping of offshore routing numbers, shell company registrations, and official church tax documents. "Let us talk about the Youth Center Building Fund," I announced, projecting my voice across the beautifully manicured lawn. "For the past 3 years, the devoted members of this congregation have donated sacrificially every single Sunday. You gave your hard-earned money, your tithes, and your offerings to build a safe haven for the youth of Atlanta. You raised nearly $500,000 under the guidance of your trusted financial committee." I looked directly at my father-in-law. "But there are no construction permits filed with the city. The commercial land you purchased sits completely empty and overgrown with weeds." A collective murmur of confusion rippled through the elite crowd. Several deacons sitting near the front row exchanged deeply concerned glances. Deacon Wallace suddenly looked as though all the blood had been drained from his body. He gripped the edge of a catered dining table, his knuckles turning pure white as he stared up at the massive screen, projecting his ultimate ruin. I zoomed in on a specific column of the spreadsheet, making the financial figures massive enough for the people standing by the outdoor bar to read perfectly. 3 months ago, Deacon Wallace used his unilateral authority on the financial committee to authorize a direct, highly secretive wire transfer. He moved exactly $400,000 out of the Sacred Youth Center Fund. But he did not send that money to a construction company or an architectural firm. I pointed a steady finger toward Jada and her husband. "He wired your charity money directly into a commercial holding account, registered to a fake cryptocurrency investment firm called Apex Horizon Investments. And the sole registered proprietor of that fraudulent shell company is Terrence." The audience erupted into absolute chaos. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal hit the congregation members like a physical blow. Terrence, the flashy, chronically unemployed brother-in-law, who had spent the entire afternoon bragging about his financial genius, was nothing more than a common thief running a predatory Ponzi scheme. And his father-in-law had willingly handed him the church savings to keep his fraudulent lifestyle afloat. The senior pastor of the church, a tall, imposing man, who had led the congregation for over 20 years, pushed his way to the very front of the crowd. His face was a mask of absolute terrifying fury. He bypassed me entirely and marched straight up to Deacon Wallace. The crowd parted for him, sensing the righteous anger radiating from every step he took. Wallace, the senior pastor, boomed his deep voice, carrying over the shouts of the angry guests. "Tell me right now that this woman is lying. Tell me before God and these witnesses that the youth center money is sitting safely in our central community bank account." Deacon Wallace shrank back against the table. The powerful, authoritative church leader who had always demanded total submission from his family was suddenly reduced to a trembling, sweating coward. He opened his mouth, but only a pathetic, breathless stammer came out. He looked desperately toward Kendrick, silently begging his successful banking executive's son to save him from this public execution. But Kendrick was paralyzed, entirely consumed by his own impending destruction. "I have the official digital ledgers, Pastor," I interjected calmly from the podium. "The money is completely gone. Terrence squandered the entire $400,000 trying to artificially inflate his failing Ponzi scheme to impress all of you." Deacon Wallace knew the external church audit was happening next month, and he panicked. He needed to replace the stolen funds before the auditors arrived and uncovered his massive federal embezzlement. The senior pastor looked at Deacon Wallace with profound, unadulterated disgust. "You stole from the widows of our church," the pastor said, his voice shaking with absolute betrayal. "You stole from the children. You are a disgrace to your family and a disgrace to the kingdom of God. I will ensure you spend the rest of your natural life in a prison cell." The sheer weight of the pastor's condemnation shattered whatever fragile alliance the Wallace family had left. Under the crushing, intense pressure of the furious crowd closing in around them, self-preservation immediately took over. Terrence, realizing that he was about to take the fall for a massive federal financial crime, completely lost his mind. He spun around and pointed an aggressive, trembling finger directly at his own wife. "It was her idea," Terrence screamed, hysterically violently, throwing Jada entirely under the bus. "Do not look at me. Jada is the one who demanded the designer bags and the luxury cars. She told her father to give us the money. She is the one who bought that stupid fake silicone belly so we could extort the church for more cash. I just did what she told me to do. I am a victim here." Jada let out a piercing shriek of pure betrayal. "You spineless, pathetic coward," she screamed, lunging at her husband with her manicured nails bared. Vivian, who had just recovered from her frantic, humiliating battle with the projector cables, heard Terrence betray her precious golden daughter. The righteous church matriarch completely snapped. She charged across the stone patio and delivered a vicious, echoing slap directly across Terrence's face. The sharp smack sounded like a gunshot. "Do not you dare blame my daughter for your miserable failures," Vivian roared, swinging her heavy designer purse at Terrence's head. "You are a worthless, pathetic excuse for a man. You ruined my family." Terrence shoved Vivian back, causing her to stumble into a towering, expensive floral arrangement. The heavy crystal vase crashed to the ground, sending water and white roses spilling across the expensive shoes of the bank executives. Jada threw herself at Terrence, screaming obscenities that completely contradicted her wholly fragile mother persona. Deacon Wallace tried to intervene weakly, grabbing Vivian's arm, but she shoved her husband away in sheer disgust, blaming him for getting caught. The perfect, untouchable image of the elite Wallace family dissolved into a violent, shouting, utterly humiliating brawl right in the middle of my pristine patio. The wealthy guests, the politicians, and the church elders backed away in absolute horror, pulling out their smartphones to record the disastrous, pathetic spectacle. They were watching the city's most respected religious family tear each other apart like wild animals over stolen charity money. I stood securely behind the podium, completely untouched by the flying debris and the violent chaos. I watched them destroy themselves with a cold, calculated sense of absolute satisfaction. I had not laid a single finger on any of them. I had simply presented the unvarnished truth and allowed their own inherent toxicity to consume them entirely. Kendrick had watched his father be publicly destroyed by the senior pastor. He had watched his mother physically attack his brother-in-law. He had watched his pregnant sister be exposed as a fraudulent, manipulative scam artist. He saw the mayor of Atlanta, his ultimate boss, actively recording the physical brawl with a look of pure corporate disgust. Kendrick realized that his pristine banking career, his social standing, and his entire future were currently burning to the ground in front of a live audience. The intense, suffocating humiliation finally broke his meticulously crafted, arrogant facade. Kendrick completely lost his temper. The polished, charismatic bank manager vanished, replaced by a desperate, cornered animal. He shoved his way through the crowd of horrified guests, marching aggressively toward the stage where I stood. His face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The veins in his neck were bulging against his expensive silk collar. He stomped up the wooden steps of the temporary stage, completely ignoring the fact that the microphone on the podium was still highly active and broadcasting across the entire estate. He stopped inches from my face, his chest heaving as he pointed a threatening, shaking finger directly between my eyes. "You think you are so incredibly smart, Naomi?" Kendrick roared, his voice dripping with venomous hatred. "You think you can just stand up here and humiliate my family in front of my boss? You think you can kick us out of this house?" I did not back away. I looked him dead in the eye and waited for him to seal his own fate. "I am the man of this house," Kendrick screamed, completely losing control of his rational mind. "I am the one with the power. You think you protected your little assets? I put a $400,000 lien on this house. I bypassed the identity verification and signed the paperwork myself. I took your equity and I gave it to my family. You are going down with us." "You stupid man." Kendrick froze. He stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open in sudden, horrific realization. His eyes darted from my perfectly calm face down to the active microphone sitting on the podium between us. The bright green light on the base of the device indicated it was completely live. The outdoor speakers had amplified his entire furious rant across the sprawling backyard. Every single guest, including the mayor of Atlanta and several prominent corporate banking executives, had just heard him clearly and unequivocally admit to forging a massive home equity line of credit. He had just confessed to severe premeditated federal bank fraud and aggravated identity theft directly into a live microphone. Kendrick's voice echoed off the white canvas tents, bouncing across the manicured lawn and reverberating against the brick exterior of my estate. The silence that followed his furious outburst was absolute and suffocating. The live microphone sitting on the podium between us had captured every single syllable of his unhinged confession. He stared at the glowing green light on the base of the microphone stand, his eyes widening in sheer unadulterated terror as the gravity of his words finally registered in his arrogant brain. He had just proudly announced to an audience of 150 prominent Atlanta citizens, including corporate executives and powerful politicians, that he bypassed federal identity verification protocols and committed severe financial fraud. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood my ground, my hands resting lightly on the edges of the wooden podium. I looked at the man I had loved for 6 years, watching his entire pristine, meticulously crafted image completely shatter into a million irreparable pieces. "You always did love an audience, Kendrick," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly amplified across the yard. "And you just saved the federal prosecutors a massive amount of paperwork. Your confession was incredibly thorough and extremely convenient." Before he could even attempt to backtrack or formulate a pathetic excuse, I tapped my tablet for the very last time. The massive LED screen behind me shifted from the church tax documents to my final, most devastating piece of evidence. 2 crisp, high-resolution legal documents filled the colossal display. On the left side of the screen was the official notarized property deed to the estate. On the right side was a highly detailed forensic handwriting analysis report from an independent board-certified expert. I turned my attention back to the captivated crowd. My husband just proudly admitted to placing a $400,000 lien on this property, I announced, ensuring every single guest heard the undeniable truth. He truly believed he had the legal authority to leverage this estate to cover up his father's massive embezzlement. But Kendrick made a fatal, arrogant assumption. He assumed that because we were married, he automatically owned the fruits of my hard labor. I pointed to the deed displayed on the screen. This $1.5 million home does not belong to Kendrick. It does not belong to me directly. It is wholly owned by a blind limited liability company that I established using my own inherited wealth before we ever walked down the aisle. Kendrick has never held any legal ownership of this property. In the eyes of the law, he is nothing more than a month-to-month tenant. I pointed to the document on the right. In order to process that massive home equity line of credit through his own retail bank branch, Kendrick had to actively forge my signature as the sole managing member of that corporate entity. The forensic analysis clearly proves that the signature on the loan documents is a complete, undeniable fabrication. He bypassed all mandatory security measures because he was the branch manager. He committed severe bank fraud and aggravated identity theft to steal $400,000 from his own wife simply to protect a family of common thieves. The wealthy banking executives standing near the outdoor bar began whispering furiously to one another. Their faces were pale with profound corporate horror. But the most significant reaction came from the mayor of Atlanta himself. As a prominent political figure and a senior executive board member of the exact same retail bank where Kendrick served as branch manager, the mayor realized the catastrophic public relations nightmare unfolding right in front of him. He could not afford to have his political administration or his financial institution associated with a confessed felon. The mayor pushed his way to the very front of the crowd, his face flushed with absolute outrage. He glared up at Kendrick, who was visibly shaking on the stage. Kendrick, the mayor, barked, his voice laced with pure disgust. "You used your executive banking credentials to facilitate a massive fraud scheme. You authorized a fraudulent loan from our institution to cover up stolen charity funds. You jeopardized the integrity of our entire bank for this pathetic criminal circus." Kendrick stammered, holding his hands up defensively. "Sir, please let me explain. It was an emergency. My father made a terrible mistake, and I was just trying to protect our family name. I was going to pay the money back before the audit. You have to understand the immense pressure I was under. I understand that you are a criminal and a massive liability." The mayor snapped loudly, completely cutting off Kendrick's desperate excuses. "You are an absolute disgrace to our institution and to this city. You are officially terminated effective immediately. I will personally contact the Regional Board of Directors and the State Banking Commission to ensure your professional license is permanently revoked. Do not ever step foot inside that bank again. You absolutely disgust me." Kendrick physically staggered backward as if he had been shot in the chest. His entire world was disintegrating in real time. He had just lost his prestigious banking career, his massive six-figure salary, his immaculate social standing, and his reputation in the Atlanta community. He looked out at the crowd, searching desperately for a single friendly face. But the elite guests were actively backing away from the stage, treating him like a highly contagious disease. Deacon Wallace was weeping silently by the catering tables. Vivian was sitting on the grass, rocking back and forth in a state of complete shock. Jada and Terrence were actively ignoring him, too consumed by their own impending legal ruin to care about anyone else. Kendrick slowly turned back to me. The arrogant, powerful man of the house was completely gone. He fell to his knees right there on the wooden stage, perfectly framed by the massive digital evidence of his crimes glowing behind him. He reached out and desperately grabbed the hem of my crimson blazer, tears streaming down his handsome face. He resorted to his final, most pathetic weapon. He tried to use his charm and my deep loyalty against me. "Naomi, please," Kendrick begged, his voice cracking as he sobbed loudly into the active microphone. "I am so sorry. I messed up. I lost my way. But we are married. We made vows before God. You are my wife. You are my rock. Please do not do this to me. You are a strong, forgiving black woman. You have always held me down and protected me. Please, baby, find it in your heart to forgive me. Pray on it. Do not let them take me away. We can fix this. I need you to save me. I need you to be my peace. I looked down at the man kneeling in front of me. This was the same man who had confidently smiled while his family threw my grandmother's heirloom quilts onto the dirt. This was the same man who had told me to keep my voice down for the neighbors while he actively stole my home. He had systematically exploited my love, my patience, and my financial stability to elevate his toxic narcissistic family. He had genuinely believed that my sole purpose in life was to serve as his silent, obedient shield. He thought he could break me down and force me into submission using twisted cultural tropes and religious guilt. He was dead wrong. I did not feel an ounce of pity for him. I did not feel sorrow or regret. I felt utterly and completely liberated. I looked down at him with absolute zero emotion. The heavy silence on the patio was deafening as everyone waited for my response. I leaned closely into the microphone, ensuring my final words to him would be heard by the entire city. I forgive you, Kendrick, I said, my voice perfectly calm, steady, and chillingly devoid of any warmth. But the federal government does not. Right on cue, the piercing, unmistakable wail of police sirens began blaring in the distance, rapidly growing louder and closer with every passing second. The beautiful, opulent outdoor gala had successfully transformed into a sprawling crime scene, and the entire congregation stood absolutely paralyzed, watching the inevitable swift arrival of their ultimate total destruction. They were finally going to be held accountable for every single lie they had ever told. The sweet taste of absolute victory rushed through my veins as the flashing blue and red lights of the advancing police cruisers illuminated the terrified faces of my former family. They wanted to steal my wealth, my peace, and my future. Instead, they had willingly walked directly into the most elaborate, perfectly executed trap of their entire miserable lives. The nightmare was over, and my brilliant, beautiful rebirth was officially beginning. They were completely finished, and I had absolutely never felt so incredibly alive. The sharp, piercing wail of police sirens suddenly shattered the stunned silence of the backyard. The distant sound rapidly amplified into a deafening roar as a massive fleet of law enforcement vehicles aggressively swarmed the quiet suburban street. 5 heavily marked Atlanta police cruisers and 3 imposing unmarked black tactical SUVs violently breached the front gates of my estate. They tore up the pristine gravel driveway, their bright red and blue emergency lights flashing relentlessly against the pristine white canvas of the caterer tents. The grand, opulent society gala immediately descended into sheer, unadulterated panic. The wealthy banking executives, the prominent local politicians, and the esteemed church elders scrambled wildly in every direction, desperate to distance themselves from the epic epicenter of the massive federal crime scene. The heavy doors of the tactical vehicles flew open. Over a dozen federal agents wearing dark sunglasses and thick bulletproof tactical vests, emblazoned with the bright yellow letters FBI, swarmed the backyard patio. They moved with terrifying, coordinated precision. The elite guests, recognizing that they were actively witnessing the absolute downfall of the most prominent religious family in Atlanta, immediately pulled out their expensive smartphones. Instead of helping their so-called friends, the affluent crowd began recording the entire spectacular, humiliating raid from the relative safety of the Rose Garden. Kendrick was still kneeling on the wooden stage directly in front of me, his tear-stained face frozen in absolute horror as the federal agents aggressively surrounded the podium. 2 towering agents marched up the steps, their hands resting firmly on their utility belts. Kendrick Wallace, one of the agents, barked, his voice booming over the lingering feedback of the live microphone. "You are under arrest for severe bank fraud, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Stand up and place your hands securely behind your back." Kendrick did not resist. The arrogant, powerful bank manager who had confidently ordered me to pack my bags just days ago was completely gone. He weakly pulled himself up from the wooden floorboards, his shoulders slumped in utter defeat. The heavy steel handcuffs clicked loudly around his wrists, completely severing his access to his pristine corporate life, his stolen wealth, and his freedom. As the agents loudly read him his Miranda rights, reciting the federal charges that would ensure he spent the next decade in a federal penitentiary, Kendrick looked back at me one final time. His eyes begged for a mercy he absolutely did not deserve. I simply turned my head away completely, erasing him from my vision. Down on the stone patio, the chaos was intensifying exponentially. Terrence, realizing that his fake cryptocurrency empire had completely collapsed, decided to make a run for it. He foolishly attempted to sprint past the custom outdoor bar, hoping to escape through the side gate. He did not make it past the ice sculptures. A highly trained tactical agent easily intercepted his path aggressively, tackling Terrence and slamming him face first onto a long catered dining table. Expensive crystal serving dishes and silver platters of beluga caviar crashed violently to the stone ground as the agent pinned Terrence down. Terrence screamed and thrashed, shouting that he was an innocent victim, but the agent swiftly secured the handcuffs around his wrists, formally charging him with multiple counts of wire fraud, and exploiting the elderly Deacon Wallace did not run. The powerful, imposing church leader, who had spent decades demanding total submission from his congregation, simply collapsed into a pathetic, weeping heap near the string quartet staging area. He fell to his knees, burying his face in his hands, sobbing uncontrollably as an agent read him his federal charges for massive corporate embezzlement and charity fraud. The esteemed deacon, a man who had proudly stood in the pulpit every Sunday morning preaching about morality and righteousness, was now publicly crying like a frightened child as the cold steel handcuffs locked around his wrists. He had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from the Sacred Youth Center Fund, robbing the very children he swore to protect, and now he was going to pay the ultimate price. Vivian, witnessing the complete, irreversible destruction of her precious, untouchable family, completely snapped. The righteous, sophisticated church matriarch lost every single ounce of her carefully manicured composure. She threw her hands toward the bright blue sky, her face contorted in a mask of pure feral rage. She began screaming at the absolute top of her lungs, cursing God for abandoning her and violently cursing my name for exposing their dark, twisted secrets. "You are a wicked, evil woman, Naomi!" Vivian shrieked, her voice cracking as two female officers approached her to ensure she did not interfere with the federal arrests. "You ruined my beautiful son. You destroyed this holy family. You will burn in hell for what you did to us today." I stood silently on the stage watching her frantic, undignified meltdown with supreme satisfaction. She had spent 6 years trying to crush my spirit and steal my joy, but her toxic reign was officially over. The overwhelming stress, the sheer public humiliation, and the crushing realization that her husband and son were both heading to federal prison finally took their toll on her physical body. Vivian dramatically rolled her eyes into the back of her head, let out one final piercing wail, and completely fainted, dead away onto the perfectly manicured grass. The officers quickly called for a standby paramedic to check her vitals, refusing to let her theatrical medical emergency disrupt the ongoing federal raid. Meanwhile, Jada had miraculously managed to slip away from her plush velvet throne chair during the initial surge of panic. She was desperately trying to use the chaotic distraction of her mother's dramatic fainting spell to quietly sneak out through the back garden gate. She had discarded her expensive designer maternity gown and was awkwardly waddling toward the exit, still clutching her expensive designer handbag filled with the cash donations she had extorted from the church aunties. But her escape attempt was entirely futile. A stern, uncompromising federal agent stepped directly into her path, completely blocking the wrought iron gate. "Jada Wallace," the agent said, holding up a thick, officially sealed manila envelope. "You are not under arrest at this exact moment, but you are not leaving this property. You are being officially served with a mandatory federal summons for severe charity fraud and criminal extortion. You will surrender your passport to the authorities immediately." Jada gasped in horror, dropping her expensive handbag onto the dirt path. The thick envelopes of extorted cash spilled out, blowing away in the warm afternoon breeze. She instinctively grabbed her stomach again, desperately trying to play the fragile, pregnant victim one last time. But the rigid, unnatural shape of the fake silicone prosthetic belly only highlighted her pathetic, undeniable guilt. She sank down against the brick wall of the garden, completely ruined. I slowly walked down the wooden steps of the temporary stage, my crimson stiletto heels clicking sharply against the stone patio. I gracefully navigated around the shattered crystal glasses, the crushed white roses, and the frantic, murmuring crowd of elite guests who were still actively recording the spectacular downfall of the Wallace family. I walked over to the custom outdoor bar, which had miraculously survived Terrence's violent tackle. I picked up a delicate crystal flute, poured myself a fresh glass of chilled sparkling apple cider, and took a long, deeply satisfying sip. I stood quietly near the edge of the patio, holding my crystal glass, and calmly watched the federal agents forcefully load my ex-husband, my ex-father-in-law, and my ex-brother-in-law into the back of the heavily armored police cruisers. They were completely stripped of their power, their arrogance, and their stolen wealth. They were going exactly where they belonged. As the heavy doors of the police vehicles slammed shut, securing their grim future, I felt a gentle presence beside me. I turned my head slightly. Mr. Winston, my loyal gardener, had quietly emerged from the side yard. He was holding a large push broom and a black plastic dustpan. He looked at the chaotic, disastrous mess scattered across the patio. The spilled caviar, the crushed flowers, and the crying, humiliated women sitting on the grass. Then he looked at me. He did not say a single word. He simply smiled, a warm, knowing smile, respectfully tipped his worn baseball cap to me, and calmly began sweeping up the dropped cocktail napkins. The trash was finally being taken out of my beautiful home, and my fresh, perfectly clean new life was truly and undeniably just beginning. The terrifying storm had finally passed us by completely, and the bright, radiant sunshine was steadily pouring down onto the pristine green grass of my completely reclaimed personal empire. I took one final, incredibly refreshing sip of my crisp, sparkling cider, deeply inhaling the remarkably sweet, beautiful scent of my absolute, unconditional, and permanent victory. The sprawling backyard was entirely devoid of its former elite guests. The prominent politicians and wealthy banking executives had fled my estate the second the federal agents began reading Miranda rights, desperate to avoid the inevitable media fallout. Only the specialized law enforcement tactical teams remained carefully securing the sprawling crime scene. I placed my empty crystal cider glass onto a pristine catering table and slowly turned my attention back to the two disgraced women remaining on my property. Vivian was currently waking up from her highly theatrical fainting spell, groggily blinking her eyes against the bright afternoon sunlight. Jada was still sitting pitifully in the dirt near the wrought iron garden gate, her expensive designer maternity gown completely ruined and her fake silicone belly lying discarded on the grass like a discarded theatrical prop. I calmly walked over to the patio bar and retrieved my sleek leather briefcase. I pulled out the crisp, legally binding documents my ruthless real estate attorney had drafted just 2 days ago. I marched directly over to Vivian and Jada, my crimson stiletto heels clicking sharply against the stone pavers. I stood over them, looking down with absolute, unwavering authority. Vivian weakly pushed herself up onto her elbows, her perfectly styled hair now a tangled, disheveled mess. "Naomi," she croaked, her voice trembling with genuine fear. "Please, you have made your point. You have destroyed my husband and my son. Have mercy on us." I did not offer her a single ounce of mercy. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out two thick, heavy-duty black plastic trash bags. They were the exact same brand of industrial garbage bags they had callously used to throw my custom-tailored business suits and my late grandmother's irreplaceable heirloom quilts onto the front lawn just 4 days ago. I forcefully dropped the empty black bags directly onto Vivian's lap. Then I handed her the stark, uncompromising legal eviction notice. "Your son is no longer the man of the house, Vivian," I stated clearly, my voice echoing in the quiet yard. "And you are officially out of time. This is a 24-hour emergency eviction notice based on criminal trespass and active federal fraud. Because this property was utilized to facilitate massive financial crimes, your fabricated tenant rights are completely nullified. You and your fraudulent daughter have exactly 20 minutes to pack whatever you can physically carry in those black trash bags. Anything left behind will be permanently seized by the federal authorities or thrown directly into a commercial dumpster." Jada began to sob hysterically, clutching her knees to her chest. "You cannot do this to us!" Jada cried out, her face streaked with ruined expensive makeup. "We have absolutely nowhere else to go. Terrence took all the cash. We do not have a car. You are throwing family out onto the street." I looked at her with pure, freezing contempt. "You are not my family, Jada. You are a common criminal who faked a high-risk pregnancy to steal my home and extort vulnerable elderly church members. You have exactly 18 minutes left before I have you physically removed from my property." Vivian frantically looked around for an ally, locking eyes with a uniformed Atlanta police officer securing the perimeter. "Officer, please help us," Vivian begged desperately. "She is illegally throwing us out of our home." The seasoned officer walked over briefly, reviewed the embossed legal eviction document bearing the swift judicial seal, and shook his head in absolute disgust. "The document is perfectly legal and entirely enforceable, ma'am," the officer stated firmly. "You are currently criminally trespassing on this private estate. I highly suggest you start packing your belongings before I am forced to arrest you for defying a direct removal order." The crushing reality of their absolute defeat finally shattered their immense, unearned arrogance. Vivian and Jada scrambled frantically to their feet, grabbing the empty black trash bags with trembling hands. They rushed clumsily through the glass patio doors, running frantically up the grand staircase toward my master bedroom. I calmly followed them inside, crossing my arms over my chest as I stood in the doorway of the master suite. I watched them desperately shove their cheap particle board picture frames, their discounted cosmetics, and their fast fashion clothing into the heavy industrial garbage bags. They were crying uncontrollably, mourning the spectacular loss of their stolen, fabricated luxury lifestyle. They carelessly shoved their belongings together, tearing the plastic bags in their frantic, pathetic rush to meet my uncompromising deadline. Exactly 20 minutes later, the two disgraced women dragged their overstuffed heavy black trash bags down my grand wooden staircase. They were sweating profusely, their faces red and twisted with supreme humiliation. I opened my heavy oak front door wide, gesturing for them to leave my sanctuary permanently. Vivian and Jada dragged their heavy garbage bags out the front door, the plastic scraping loudly against the pristine brick porch. But their ultimate punishment had only just begun. As they stumbled down the long, winding, paved driveway, they realized that their spectacular downfall was completely public. The massive fleet of flashing police cruisers and unmarked federal tactical vehicles had drawn the attention of the entire affluent suburban neighborhood. Dozens of my wealthy, highly influential neighbors had stepped out of their sprawling mansions and gathered on their perfectly manicured lawns to watch the unprecedented commotion. The entire street was lined with silent, watchful spectators. Jada, no longer wearing her fake silicone maternity belly, tried to hide her face behind her hair as she dragged her trash bag across the concrete. Vivian, the former untouchable matriarch of the community church, walked with her head bowed in profound, absolute shame. The neighbors did not whisper. They did not point or laugh. They simply stared at the two disgraced women in total, deafening silence. The sheer, judgmental weight of the community's silent condemnation pressed down on Vivian and Jada like a physical force. They were being actively banished from the elite neighborhood they had so desperately tried to infiltrate. They dragged their garbage bags down the street, calling for a budget rideshare service because they no longer had access to Terrence's leased sports cars. I stood on my front porch and watched them disappear around the corner, fully erased from my life forever. I slowly turned around and walked back inside my beautiful, quiet estate. The heavy oak front door clicked shut behind me, sealing out the chaos of the afternoon. I walked upstairs and stepped directly into my expansive master bedroom. The air inside the room was thick and stagnant, smelling faintly of Jada's cheap, overpowering synthetic perfume and Terrence's cheap cologne. I immediately walked over to the massive bay windows and pushed them wide open. The crisp, clean, refreshing Atlanta breeze poured into the room, sweeping away the toxic, lingering stench of their brief, miserable occupancy. I stood in the center of the room, looking at the scuff marks their cheap furniture had left on my premium hardwood floors. I pulled out my phone and immediately dialed the number of a highly rated premium luxury contractor I frequently used for corporate renovations. I ordered an emergency comprehensive overhaul of the entire master suite. I instructed the contractor to completely rip out the contaminated hardwood floors, tear out the baseboards, and completely destroy the master bed they had slept in. I also ordered an immediate replacement of every single lock security sensor and access code on the entire $1.5 million estate. The massive house was finally undeniably mine again. It was completely purged of their toxic, parasitic presence, and I was going to ensure that no trace of the Wallace family ever existed within these walls again. A few quiet, peaceful weeks passed since the spectacular backyard raid. The federal prosecutors moved with terrifying speed, building an absolutely watertight, comprehensive criminal case against my former family, based entirely on the massive forensic digital evidence I had meticulously provided. On a rainy Tuesday morning, I dressed in a sharp, impeccably tailored black business suit and drove to the federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta. I sat completely still in the back row of the cold, heavily guarded courtroom for Kendrick's official federal detention and bail hearing. The heavy wooden side doors opened and armed federal marshals escorted Kendrick into the brightly lit room. He was wearing a shapeless, bright orange federal prison jumpsuit, his hands heavily shackled in thick steel chains around his waist. He looked incredibly pale, gaunt, and completely broken. As he shuffled toward the defense table, his desperate, terrified eyes scanned the gallery. He finally locked eyes with me sitting in the back row. His lower lip trembled uncontrollably. He frantically mouthed the words, "Help me," across the silent courtroom. I stared at him with absolute zero emotion. I slowly turned my head, stood up gracefully, and walked out, letting the heavy wooden doors slam shut permanently behind me. 6 months passed since the heavy wooden doors of that federal courtroom slammed shut behind me. The wheels of federal justice turn with a slow grinding inevitability, and when they finally crushed the Wallace family, the destruction was absolute and permanent. The highly publicized financial fraud trial became the biggest scandal in modern Atlanta history. Kendrick, the arrogant, charismatic bank manager who believed his masculine authority placed him above the law, was sentenced to 8 years in a federal penitentiary. The judge showed absolutely no mercy for a man who used his executive banking credentials to forge documents and steal from his own wife. His pristine reputation was permanently destroyed, his banking license was officially revoked, and he was ordered to pay massive restitution that he could never possibly afford. Deacon Wallace faced an even harsher public reckoning. The man who had spent decades demanding moral perfection from his congregation was completely exposed as a greedy, hypocritical thief. He was formally excommunicated from the church in a unanimous vote by the elder board. The federal judge sentenced him to 5 years in prison for his systematic embezzlement of the Sacred Youth Center building fund. Terrence, ever the cowardly opportunist, immediately flipped on his father-in-law and his brother-in-law. He took a desperate plea deal testifying against Kendrick and Wallace in exchange for a significantly reduced sentence. But his betrayal did not save him from total financial ruin. The federal authorities seized every single asset he possessed, leaving him completely bankrupt and facing years of strict, uncompromising probation. Vivian and Jada suffered a fate that in their status-obsessed minds was far worse than a prison cell. They were completely stripped of their stolen wealth, their designer wardrobes, and their unearned societal power. The elite Atlanta community they had so desperately tried to impress completely shunned them. They were forced to move into a tiny run-down two-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. Without the scam money from Terrence or the banking salary from Kendrick to support them, Jada was finally forced to find a minimum-wage retail job. Vivian spent her days sitting in their cramped living room, bitterly complaining to anyone who would listen about how I had unfairly destroyed her blessed family. They had absolutely nothing left but each other, trapped in a miserable, toxic echo chamber of their very own making. While they wallowed in the miserable ashes of their own destruction, I was busy orchestrating a brilliant, beautiful rebirth. The moment the federal investigations officially cleared my property of any lingering legal holds, I placed the massive suburban estate on the highly competitive Atlanta housing market. Because of the comprehensive renovations and the intense, undeniable public intrigue surrounding the property, a wealthy out-of-state investor purchased the house for significantly more than my original asking price. I walked away from the sale with a massive, life-changing profit. I took that money and purchased a sleek, modern, breathtaking luxury penthouse apartment directly in the heart of downtown Atlanta. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning panoramic view of the entire city skyline. The space was completely and undeniably mine, free from any toxic, painful memories, dark secrets, or arrogant men demanding my absolute submission. I also took full control of my professional destiny. I officially resigned from my demanding corporate compliance position and opened my very own independent forensic accounting firm. I dedicated my entire new business completely to empowering other women, helping them protect their hard-earned assets, uncover hidden financial abuse, and navigate the treacherous, complicated waters of high-stakes divorces. I became a fierce, uncompromising advocate for women who had been told to shrink themselves to keep the peace. My firm became incredibly successful almost overnight, fueled by my flawless reputation and my unyielding dedication to absolute financial justice. I was no longer just a corporate employee protecting billionaire shareholders. I was an independent powerhouse actively changing the lives of women who needed a powerful champion fighting for their right to total financial freedom and independence. A warm, beautiful Saturday evening arrived exactly 1 year to the day since they had callously thrown the beautiful quilts of my late grandmother onto the front dirt lawn. I attended a massive, highly exclusive philanthropic gala in the center of the city. But I was not just a guest, I was the primary sponsor. I had established a lucrative, comprehensive scholarship fund designed specifically to support young, ambitious Black women pursuing advanced degrees in finance and accounting. I walked into the grand ballroom wearing a stunning custom-designed emerald green evening gown. The heavy silk trailed gracefully behind me as I moved through the room. I was respected, I was glowing, and I was completely, undeniably free. Prominent politicians, successful business leaders, and highly influential community members approached me throughout the entire evening, offering their deep respect and admiration for my philanthropic work. I stood on the outdoor balcony of the grand ballroom holding a crystal glass of sparkling cider. Looking out over the glittering lights of the beautiful city, I now completely conquered. I thought back to that terrible afternoon when I stood in my own driveway surrounded by a pack of entitled narcissists who demanded my total submission. They genuinely thought I was weak. They truly believed that because I was a woman, my sole purpose in life was to silently absorb their abuse, surrender my wealth, and happily sacrifice my own peace to protect their fragile, toxic family image. I smiled to myself, feeling the cool night breeze against my face, knowing I had permanently rewritten the ending to their predictable, pathetic story. I was finally the undisputed author of my beautiful, limitless destiny. They always told me a strong woman sacrifices everything to keep her family warm. They were absolutely right about that. I just decided to set the whole house on fire to do it, and the beautiful warmth, it feels truly spectacular.